All right, so now we're going to take a look at the winding down of the New Deal. And the first thing we're going to look at is the election of 1936. So Roosevelt is challenged in the election of 1936 by Republican Alfred Landon. And with working class voters providing massive majorities for the Democrats and businesses, both large and small, bitterly estranged from the New Deal, politics in the United States reflect class division far more completely than at any other time in American history. Now, in 1936, Roosevelt wins a landslide victory with more than 60% of the popular vote and an even more impressive number in the Electoral College. But the 1936 election is significant for a couple of different reasons. First, we're going to see the seeds planted for the anti-government conservatism that we would recognize today. Opposition to the New Deal will help to create that anti-government conservatism that's bent on upholding the free market and dismantling the welfare state. We're also seeing in 1936 the creation of the New Deal Coalition, a combination of organized labor, Southern white voters, Northern black voters, Protestant farmers, urban Catholics and Jews, industrial workers, middle-class homeowners, people who have reaped the benefits, or at least some benefits, of the New Deal programs. Now, when FDR is inaugurated for his second term in office, there are two things that are significant. First, this is the first time that a president is inaugurated in January. The 20th Amendment, I believe it is passed, and that changes the inauguration from March to January, shortening the amount of time that a president has to wait before they can take office after being elected. And in his inaugural address, FDR admits that the Depression has not been conquered. But he moves forward from his electoral mandate in 1936 into what was probably one of his first really serious political miscalculations. So, on the pretext that several members of the Supreme Court were getting on in years and were maybe a little too old to perform their duties, the president proposes that he should be allowed to appoint a new justice for each one that remained on the court past the age of 70. At the time, 6 out of the 9 justices were over the age of 70. Now, this sounds nice, but arguably FDR's real aim was to change the balance of the court. The court is still very heavily conservative, and he feared that they would invalidate key provisions of the Second New Deal, most especially the Social Security and Wagner Acts. Now, despite his popularity in 1936, this doesn't go over well. There is widespread alarm, and the Democratic-led Congress actually rejects the plan. However, ultimately, this is kind of successful. So while FDR doesn't actually get to pack the court with new judges, the judges who are on the court, kind of sensing danger, do an astonishing about-face in how they determine cases that come up. Key justices on the court, including Chief Justice Charles Evan Hughes, reveal a sudden new willingness to support economic regulation, both by federal and state governments. And the Supreme Court becomes far more receptive to New Deal regulation after this. So FDR kind of got his way anyway. We're also going to see the last of the Second New Deal measures. A couple of measures will get pushed through right at the end. The first of these is the United States Housing Act, which initiated the first major national effort to build homes for the poorest Americans. The Fair Labor Standards Act, after being stalled in Congress for over a year, will finally be passed in 1938, and this law will ban goods produced by child labor, from interstate commerce, a law that had previously been on the books in the United States, but was overturned by the Supreme Court previously as well. This act will also set a 40-cent hourly minimum wage and require overtime pay for any hours worked over 40 hours a week. Now, with economic conditions improving somewhat in 1936, Roosevelt decides that he would like to reduce federal funding for farm subsidies and for Works Progress Administration relief efforts in an effort to kind of balance the budget, because Roosevelt was never really comfortable with a hugely out of balance budget. If you'll recall, it's one of the things that he criticized Hoover for in 1932. However, the results of that were disastrous. Unemployment was still at 14% when Roosevelt enacted these measures, and it rose to 20% yet again by the end of the year. The economic downturn of 1937 often being referred to as the Roosevelt recession. Ultimately, this is going to create a shift in the New Deal approach to the economic crisis. Roosevelt will get on board with a new economic theory, Keynesian economics, which promotes government spending. The idea, extremely simplified, is that if an economy is contracting in other sectors, the government needs to maintain its purchasing power and stimulate economic activity, even if that means creating a budget deficit. So basically what that's saying is that if consumers aren't spending as much money, foreign importers aren't spending as much money, businesses aren't spending as much money, the government needs to make up for that by spending more money, pumping more money into the economy in order to keep it going. Now, this will often result in a budget deficit, that is, spending more money than you actually have. Something that Roosevelt had been reluctant to do, but ultimately he will kind of embrace that at this point. And we will see a shift as well away from economic planning and redistribution with the New Deal reforms. Now, the New Deal will ultimately never end the Depression, but a massive government spending project will end the Depression in the form of World War II. And so the New Deal is definitely going to start winding down as Americans turn their attention yet again to things developing in Europe. Now, Roosevelt is also getting mounting opposition to his policies at home, particularly from Southern Democrats. More and more of them find themselves at odds with Roosevelt's policies, with alarm over the rising specter of unionization, racial equality, and political radicalism all contributing to this. Some of the key provocations for Southern congressmen was the release of a report on economic conditions in the South from the administration, including a letter from the president which referred to the region as the nation's #1 economic problem. The report also revealed that the South lagged far behind the rest of the country in industrialization and investment in education and public health. The Southern Conference for Human Welfare will also form. This is a new generation of homegrown radicals that will work actively for unionization, unemployment relief, and racial justice within Southern states, and will frankly alarm a lot of Southern politicians. And the last straw, arguably, is Roosevelt's attempt to liberalize the Southern Democratic Party. He concludes that the enactment of further New Deal measures would require the liberalization of the Southern Democratic Party to get out some of these stodgy old conservative Democrats that are in Congress from these Southern states and get some new, more amendable people in their places. And so in the midterm election of 1938, he encourages challenges to these incumbent Democrats. However, this was also a political miscalculation on Roosevelt's part, and he is soundly rebuked by voters in those midterm elections. After that, Congress then passes over to control for these Southern Democrats and Northern Republicans, making it impossible to pass further New Deal measures. But also, again, we're going to see the United States shifting its focus around this time away from these domestic concerns and towards things that are bubbling up in Europe. Now, the New Deal has historic significance. It greatly expands the role of the federal government in the economy, makes government an independent force in relations between industry and labor, ensures bank deposits, regulates the stock market, transforms the physical environment through the building of dams and reforestation projects and all these other things, and also helps to redraw the map of American politics with the formation of the New Deal coalition. And so the New Deal has a lasting impact on American life. But while it does do a lot of good things in the United States, it does have some severe limitations. And we will finish off talking about Chapter 21 with just one more video talking about some of the places where the New Deal ultimately fails.